that the technology is okay at your end and you can hear and see us. And today we have a very rich agenda. So before we start, I will briefly take you through. Let's just project the slide with the agenda. So in the beginning, my colleague and expert on work-based learning, Stefan Thomas, will launch the discussion on the quality assurance of work-based learning, and we will provide some insights from the ETF work on the monitoring and evaluation of work-based learning. To follow, a presentation of Annette Kurtz from the Secretariat of the European Network for Quality Assurance in Vocational Education and Training on the EU tools on quality assurance of work-based learning developed to support VET systems, providers, and enterprises. After that, Kahaber Eradze from the National Center for Educational Quality Enhancement of Georgia will present how quality assurance of work-based learning works in Georgia. And the final presentation will be by Brigitte Bouquet from France Compétences on the quality assurance of apprenticeships in France. And we will also have 2 sessions for questions and comments in between these presentations. So please use the chat. Very warm welcome to our speakers and all the participants. We are already almost 40 people. I see that many of you have already started to present yourself in the chat. Please continue to do it. Present yourself, where you come from, what organization you represent. Finally, after this intro, I'm happy to pass the floor to my colleague, Hugues Moussy. Hugues is the head of the Systems Performance and Assessment Unit of the ETF, and he will open the meeting. Over to you, Hugues.
Thank you, Nadezhda. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Can you hear me well? I guess so.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So welcome everyone to on this forum. The ETF Forum for Quality Assurance in VET is, as you might know, a transnational forum that supports its members to improve their quality assurance system through peer learning and exchange on different methods and instruments of quality assurance. And since last year, the forum has been organizing a number of webinars on quality assurance in different VET policy areas. And today, as you know, we will look at quality assurance mechanism for and of work-based learning. So work-based learning is an increasing priority for ETF partner countries and the European Union to improve skills and employability, enhance economic competitiveness. And in 2020, there was a council recommendation on VET that set up a target of 60% of recent graduates that should benefit from exposure to work-based learning during their VET apprenticeship by 2025. Work-based learning provides definitely benefits to the learners, employers, and the economy at large, but in terms of quality assurance systems and mechanisms, it also poses a number of specific questions and specific issues. So that's actually what we would like to go through today, go through some of these issues and solutions also through 2 presentations of national approaches, one in Georgia and the other one in France, and tools that the EU and ETF also, it will be an opportunity to present some tools that ETF has been developing to support actors involved in work-based learning. So that's once again, welcome to this webinar. And I hand it over to you again, Nadezhda, to really now dig and jump into the core of what we have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugues, for this encouraging opening. And I'm now giving the floor to my colleague Stefan Thomas, the expert of the ETF on work-based learning. Over to you, Stefan.
Yeah, hello, good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome also from my side. Can you hear me well? Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you
yes,
also,
we do.
Ook, for your introduction. You already set the scene. You mentioned that work-based learning is not only of importance in the member states. We have seen the Riga declarations in 2015, which highlighted work-based learning. They also continue to be important. Work-based learning is a major issue in most of the European documents related to that. You mentioned the recommendations where we have even a specific target. 60% of the learners should be exposed to work-based learning. So it's an important issue, but it is also an issue in our partner countries. In almost all our partner countries, we have seen major reforms going on in a lot of countries in recent years. Also, these reforms have been inspired by the Riga declarations and also, of course, by the more recent documents. So that's our topic for today. It's about work-based learning and it's about quality assurance. I'm a work-based learning specialist working in the ETF with my colleagues Didier Gélibert and also Christine van den Einde, who is also here with us today. So we will look briefly, what do we understand by work-based learning? Maybe we could move to the next slide. And here we use, let's say, an internal definition in the ETF. We define work-based learning as learning by doing real work through production of real goods and services. This work can be paid or unpaid. We see both in various countries. And it may or it may not be combined with school-based or center-based learning, so in classrooms or in workshops. But usually it is, and we also in the ETF, we recommend that it is combined with a component of school-based or center-based learning. Then we also have borderline cases like work-based learning simulation that has become a little bit more important in the, let's say, past 1.5 years. During the pandemic, when a lot of work-based learning could not take place because companies were either closed or it was too difficult to reach out to learners and trainers. And also job shadowing, that is, let's say, a more lighter type of work-based learning. Next slide, please. We usually look at two different types, and it might be worth recalling once again the major differences. So one term that is frequently used is apprenticeship. What do we understand by apprenticeship? It is a type of work-based learning that provides occupational skills and typically lead to a recognized qualification. Usually, apprenticeships last several years. In most of our partner countries, it's 3 or 4 years. We find them in initial VET usually, but there are also some examples for apprenticeships for adults. It is learning at the workplace and usually combined with school-based learning in a structured way. That's quite important. And most often, not always, we also see exceptions, but most often, the apprentice is considered an employee. So he has a work contract and also in most of the cases, a salary. But here, once again, we also see exceptions where the learner still has the status of a student. Then in contrast to apprenticeship, what do we understand by traineeship and internships? Traineeships and internships usually are shorter workplace training periods that complement formal or non-formal education. We know that most of us, let's say, know traineeships, internships, also from tertiary education, from higher education programs. So typically, these are short periods of learning at the workplace, for example, during summer breaks. It is usually not so structured compared to apprenticeship. It usually lasts a few days, sometimes a few weeks or a few months, but it's not, or let's say traineeships or internships are not usually lasting for several years. So these are the major, let's say, differences. You all know probably that there's an academic discussion going on about how to define all these different types of work-based learning. I chose those two because they are probably the most important ones, and also these 2 or 3 terms are frequently used. And I just wanted to give you, let's say, a basic understanding how we use these technical terms and what we do understand by them. Okay, next slide, please. Hugues also already mentioned why work-based learning is important. Why does it matter? We could say it's a win-win, a triple win. It's good for learners, it's good for employers, and it's also good for society. For the learners, it can improve employability. We have clear evidence for that we see better school-to-work transition, for example. It also offers the learners the opportunity to develop personal and professional competences, and usually also learners have better access to jobs. What are the advantages for employers? Usually they can achieve higher productivity. Learners get familiar with the business, they get familiar with clients, they get familiar with colleagues, they can develop technical and job-specific skills. Recruitment might be more efficient when companies can retain apprentices in their company. That's also a major advantage, a major benefit for them. And for the society, of course, you might see more relevant skills. It might also be when we look at the entire system, it might also be a cheaper solution for the society, as there might be savings also for the public purse. Next slide, please. We in the ETF, together also with our colleagues in our sister organization, CEDEFOP, we have identified quality assurance as one of the 10 critical success factors for work-based learning. So that's why I'm happy that I can talk about this issue today with you, and that we will see interesting case studies from France, from Georgia, but also from the EU during this webinar today, how quality assurance is or has been implemented in a different context. Okay, next please. I would like to now look very briefly at what we call the IPOO model and give you a few examples for monitoring and evaluation issues related to specifically work-based learning. We all know, you probably all know very well how to monitor, how to evaluate, how to quality assure school-based learning. But the topic of today is about work-based learning. So there are, of course, differences between the two, and we might look at the specific characteristics of work-based learning and what is and how these characteristics are related to monitoring and evaluation, which is always, let's say, the necessary foundation for quality assurance. So if we have a look at the input level, here we talk about trainers. We need trainers in companies. We need companies, of course, also. They need to be there, otherwise work-based learning cannot take place. We need work-based learning places. We need curricula or programs. We need timetables, financial resources, quite important, regulations, bylaws, laws, etc. So what could be typical monitoring and evaluation issues, questions that emerge. That's a question I'm asked frequently when I work, when I visit our partner countries, and when I talk to policymakers that have implemented, that have supported work-based learning. A question is always what is going to change when it comes to quality assurance, when it comes to monitoring and evaluation, when we introduce more work-based learning or work-based learning of a higher quality. So to start with, very simple, of course, we're always interested in the level of participation of learners. That's a simple question, but it's not so easy to answer. I can see that every day when I look, for example, for data. So how many students, for example, enroll in work-based learning programs, for example, in dual programs, which are the most popular profiles, and then an evaluation question that comes up often. Why do students opt for dual programs and not school-based programs, or the other way around? Why do they opt for certain profiles? Why do women opt for certain profiles? Why do men opt for certain profiles? These are typical questions. Then, of course, the participation of companies. The company is key. This is let's say, the major element of work-based learning. Many countries monitor a so-called indicator, which is called company participation rate. So how many companies offer training places? Larger companies, for example, more involved than smaller or micro companies. And then, of course, the question also, why do some companies offer training places and why do some companies do not offer training places? It's quite an interesting question, because that is very, very often the major bottleneck when it comes to the implementation of work-based learning programs, that policymakers say we have problems to get employers, to get companies on board. Another major input, an important input, are the trainers for work-based learning. I'm talking about the in-company trainers in the companies. So you could, for example, look at the share of companies that have a certified in-company trainer. Of course, that you can only do that if there is a program to train in-company trainers. And why do some companies, for example, invest in the training of their trainers, and why are some not involved? The costs are also important. The cost of work-based learning. That's an important factor, especially for the government, when, for example, the government offers incentives for companies. And then you need to monitor, let's say, how efficient these incentives are. So how much does dual education cost the government, and how much does it cost employers is an interesting question. Let's maybe move to the processes, to the next level of the IPOO model, a very simple model. Here we can look at the cooperation of the two learning venues. This is crucial. This is, we could say, this sits at the heart of work-based learning. This cooperation needs to work if we want to see successful work-based learning. So questions for evaluation could be, how well is the communication and cooperation between companies and vet schools working? Is there a good alignment of both learning venues in terms of time, in terms of how trainers in schools and trainers in companies work together, cooperate, collaborate? Is the alternation between vet school and company flexible enough? These are typical questions at this level. Because, of course, there are also other questions, but these are probably the most important ones. Let's move to the output level. Please. So what could be monitored here? How many students are dropping out from work-based learning programs at different stages, at grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, if we take a typical example of a 3-year program, for example. And dropping out is also slightly different from monitoring or dropping out in school-based vet. You could, for example, drop out from one company in work-based learning, but continue with your program in another company. So how would you monitor this? There are good examples for that. These are, let's say, questions that are quite crucial. When it comes to evaluation, why do dropout rates and completion rates vary from profile to profile? Or we might also see differences when it comes to women and men. So these are interesting questions. When it comes to the assessment of work-based learning, we could monitor what is the share of students that pass the assessment for a certain profile. Again, here we could disaggregate data by sex, by profiles, by regions. There are many, let's say, many opportunities there. Now let's move to the outcome level. And then the next slide, please. This is, of course, very interesting. Many say, and I mentioned that, Hugues mentioned that work-based learning is associated with a lot of advantages. And of course, we need to see, are these, let's say, advantages that we claim work-based learning has, are they materializing? So, for example, we might look at how do perform learners that have gone through work-based learning programs in comparison to learners that have gone through rather school-based program on the labor market. Do they find employment? Are they staying in their training companies? That is an effect that is very important for the companies because they invest in training. It's a cost for them. So they're usually interested in retaining their students, their learners. Then we could look at the provision of dual programs. Many countries start with a pilot, maybe in a certain sector, economic sector, or only a few profiles. You could look at how relevant are those programs, or would you like to, in a given country, would you like to extend dual programs to more sectors and more profiles? This is also an interesting question. And then, of course, the costs and benefits. I mean, the costs, we already talked about it. It's a major input. But then when we compare costs and benefits, that is, of course, something we need to look at the outcome level. So does dual education really have the long-term benefits for companies and also for learners that we are claiming they have? So this was, from my side, let's say a brief introduction to monitoring and evaluation issues related to work-based learning that usually emerge when countries introduce more work-based learning. So, for example, they extend the share of work-based learning in programs or work-based learning of a higher quality. That's it from my side. I'm sure quite a few of these issues will be discussed when the three speakers from Georgia, from France, and from the EU will present. We are working on that. We in the ETF, we are currently in the process of finalizing a new handbook on monitoring and evaluation of work-based learning, which will be available at the end of the summer or early autumn, which will go more into the details, which will discuss also indicators. I will, of course, inform all of you, all the participants, when this new handbook will be available. What you see here are our standard handbooks, work-based learning, how ready are we? And then we also have, next slide, please. We also have a specific handbook on financing. But the new handbook, as I said, will be available in the late summer. And it will address specifically this question, how to monitor and how to evaluate work-based learning.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you very much. I think I took a little bit more time than planned. I'm sorry for that. Nadezhda.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for opening this discussion and immediately drawing attention to important issues that various actors involved in work-based learning have to interrogate. I would like to remind our participants that you can use the chat for your questions. And now I'm very happy to pass the floor to Annette Kurz from the Secretariat of the European Network for Quality Assurance. Over to you, Annette.
Thank you, Nadezhda. Yes, I prepared a couple of introductory slides that we can probably deal with a little bit quickly, because thanks to the introductions from Hugues and Stefan, a couple of important clarifications have already been made. So just to give you an overview on what I would like to present in the next 15 minutes, I would like to quickly introduce you to two policy tools and instruments developed at European level that deal with quality assurance in work-based learning and apprenticeships, and that is Echovet, the European Quality Assurance Framework for Vocational Education and Training, and it is the European Framework for Quality and Effective Apprenticeships. Hugues and Stefan have already referred to work-based learning and apprenticeships being a constant policy priority at EU level for the last 10 years. So we can go to the next slide, and that is actually something that we also have heard already, but maybe just for the understanding of the two instruments and what they are supposed to be doing, just a very quick reminder that work-based learning is a very broad concept that refers basically to all kinds of learning at the workplace, or as Stefan has put it, related to a work task, while apprenticeships are a very specific form of work-based learning with a lot of characteristics. And the two instruments that I will be talking about actually complement each other. Echovet is really designed to help with the quality assurance of all types of learning in VET, so including work-based learning and apprenticeships, but also school-based learning, so it's much broader designed. The European Framework for Quality and Effective Apprenticeships is really specifically designed to help with the quality assurance of apprenticeships. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Nadezhda. Just a couple of quality dimensions. So why are we doing this? So why is quality assurance so important? I mean, obviously, we want to assure, or we want to make sure that there is high quality training available for learners at all learning venues. But especially in an EU context, a lot of focus has been put on safeguarding the educational value of apprenticeship and its link to employability and lifelong learning. It is also very important to make sure that apprenticeship schemes are resilient to external pressure. So, for instance, what we now saw with the pandemic, and the economic impact that this has had, that has also majorly affected work-based learning and apprenticeships. And the better an apprenticeship system or a work-based learning scheme is integrated into the VET system and based on stable agreements with between social partners, the better it is geared up to withstand these external pressures. Next slide, please. So first, I will focus on the Echovet framework and the building blocks for work-based learning that have been introduced. Next slide. So Echovet is really a reference framework to support member states in improving the quality of VET. So how does it do that? It is a very open instrument, so it's not very prescriptive, because we are aware that there is a broad range of VET systems in place across Europe, and Echovet needs to be able to accommodate all of those. And as I was saying, it covers all learning environments and all learning types, so digital, face-to-face, or blended, delivered by both public and private providers. Next slide. It is based on a quality cycle, which you probably know already. And I'm just mentioning this to kind of draw attention to the phases, let's say, of the policy cycle. Stefan was just now presenting an approach to monitoring and evaluation. So that would be here in Echovet, that would be the third phase, as you can see, but there are also the planning phase, the implementation phase, and the review phase. And in the Echovet logic, so to say, it is important to pay attention to quality criteria in all of these phases, so really throughout the entire policy cycle. And how does Echovet do that? So Echovet has developed a set of indicative descriptors for each phase. So what do we mean when we refer to quality? And it has set out a set of reference indicators that can be used to measure the quality, so to say, to support the evaluation and the review of national, regional VET systems, but also VET providers. So Echovet was set up to work in a systemic context, but also in a provider level context. So next slide, please. I think we can skip that one. And can go directly to the 6 Echovet building blocks for work-based learning. So if you bear in mind the policy cycle that we were just looking at, I think those building blocks were developed to help with the setup, so with the planning and the implementation of work-based learning. So a nice complement to what, or complementary aspect to what Stefan was just presenting, which was rather, as we said, in phase 3 and 4. But you will also see similar topics and similar questions that need to be asked to cover or to help with the quality assurance. And here again, a reminder. Echovet, as I said, is broader and it covers apprenticeship schemes as well as on-the-job training schemes, so internships and traineeships, so work placements, but also the integration of, let's say, work-based learning parts into a school-based program. And if we go to the first, the next slide, please. Here you can see, as I said, there are 6 different building blocks. And the first one is really about the design of work-based learning. And as you can see, I think the link to this will just in a minute be posted in the chat box. So you can maybe access the brochure that has been prepared here and can have a look at this for yourself. The logic here is that in the left-hand column here, there is a little explanation. What does that building block mean? Basically, designing work-based learning really needs a very close collaboration with partner organizations to ensure the relevance of a learner's training during the periods of work-based learning. And there is a call of action for those that are in the process of setting up such a work-based learning scheme. And there are a couple of questions here that you should be deciding on. So which organizations do you need to work together with? Which courses or qualifications should the learners follow? And there are always key issues presented and a couple of main messages that are important for work-based learning. So if we move on to the next one, This is the building block about improving the quality. So what does that building block mean? It is about agreeing with partner organization when the quality of training will be monitored and how improvements will be made. So basically putting in place the arrangements that then can be used when it comes to the actual monitoring and evaluation phase, because that, I mean, data need to be collected, structures need to be in place. How do we make sure that we're aware of the specific needs of the learners throughout the work-based learning? So how are we going to respond to the learners' ongoing or emerging training needs, and how will problems experienced by a learner be resolved? The fourth building block, that is also a very important one because it's about communication between the learners and the partner organizations, which are usually the workplace or the place where the work-based learning will be executed. So usually companies and the vet schools and the learners. So there is also talk in the apprenticeship context. There's also talk of tripartite agreements, and in let's say more informal formats, this is also important. So set up a communication structure. So how will organizations involved in training communicate each other? How will they keep touch with each other and with the learners? What instruments are going to be used to stay on top of the learners' progress? And then the next one is about training the staff. So that is also very important, especially, or the first thing that would probably pop in your mind is that this is important for in-company trainers and mentors, but actually it might also be important for the staff in the vet school if there is a collaboration, because there's also the requirement that vet school teachers really try to keep abreast of developments in the profession, technological innovation, and there really the collaboration and the continuing training is really, really important to make sure that high quality training for the learner is possible. And then finally, the last building block here in relation to Echovet is about the assessment of the learner. So how is this done, especially in more, let's say, formal environments where a learner is trained up in view of a qualification? It is really necessary to make sure that the work-based learning part is assessed and it is clear how those individual achievements will be credited in view of achieving a qualification, and how this is done in collaboration with the school. So does the trainer at the workplace really provide just a very informal assessment, and this is then translated into maybe the givens set out by national training regulations at the school, or do we expect the companies to do that on their own? These questions need to be clarified. Okay, so that's really very quickly what Echovet has developed for quality assurance in work-based learning. And now I'd like to move on to the European framework for quality and effective apprenticeships. So as I said, a very specific form of work-based learning, and usually one that is rather regulated and rather well embedded, or let's say comparatively better embedded in VET systems, and usually leading to a qualification. And if we look at the next slide here, just to give you a brief understanding of what this framework is supposed to be doing. It aims to provide a coherent framework for apprenticeships based on a common understanding of what defines quality and effectiveness. Taking into account, obviously, the diversity and the different traditions of vocational education and training in the member states. And it invites member states to ensure that they are, that their apprenticeships systems or schemes are responsive to labor market needs and provide benefits to employers and apprentices alike by building on a well-defined set of criteria. So it really rather, I mean, as opposed to Echovet that has indicative descriptors, a bit similar to the quality criteria set out here, but also has a set of indicators on how to actually measure that the quality areas and the quality descriptors are in place. The EFQEA really just sets out the quality criteria, but does not really make any suggestions on how to measure that. So let's move on to the next slide, then we can have a look at the different, the 14 quality criteria. As you can see, there are 7 criteria related to the learning and working conditions, and there are 7 criteria related to the framework conditions. I'll go through them very quickly just to make sure we don't run over time even more. There is a written agreement should be there. The learning outcomes in relation to work-based learning should be really defined. There should be pedagogical support, and that should be to the learner, and that should be collaboration and a joint effort. The workplace component, and that is important, should be at least 50% of the total learning time. The apprentices should be paid. There should be social protection, so they should really be an employee. And as such, the work health and safety conditions should also be relevant for them. The framework condition, there should be a regulatory framework. Social partners play a very important role. There should be support for companies available, financial and non-financial. Apprenticeships should really be a starting point for a lifelong career. So it should not, like I said before, it should not be a short-term thing just to get a person quickly into employment, but it should be a basis for a career. Career guidance and awareness raising, transparency, and that's a bit self-referential, but quality assurance and tracking of apprentices, so graduate tracking, so what happens after they graduate, that should really also be in place. Okay, so next slide, please. The European Commission and CEDEFOP are continuously monitoring this and are currently collecting data and evidence from 3 years of implementing this framework. There is a report published just a couple of months ago, and thanks Eva for posting the link to the report. And the European Commission will report on the implementation of EFQEA later this summer. So ongoing work, and I'll leave it at that, and I'll hand back over to Nadezhda. I hope I wasn't too much over time. Sorry.
No, you weren't. Thank you very much, Annette, for presenting these tools that are, let's say, at disposal and provide guidance to VET providers, companies, and national policymakers. And we can also see how they link to the monitoring and evaluation questions presented earlier by Stefan. But I would now like to open for questions or comments from our audience. I know, Annette, you have to leave earlier, so I just wanted to check with you if you are still available for this 10 minutes.
Absolutely.
Yep,
Yes,
great,
yes,
great.
no,
Thank you very much.
Super.
So, colleagues, you may wish to use this opportunity to have Annette still with us, because she will be leaving then after this session. So I'm now passing the floor to my colleague, Eva Jansova. Eva is part of our ETF Quality Assurance and Governance team, and she will moderate this session. Eva, over to you.
Thank you, Nadia. So having in mind also the timing, I will stick to two questions that I would like to select from the several and many questions that we received in our chat. So first one will be to Stefan, a bit more general, probably going beyond the quality assurance topic. There was a question on the possible impact, or whether there is evidence on the impact of work-based learning on productivity or competitiveness. And also what is, let's say, the impact or role of work-based learning in terms of quality or access to quality education. Could you comment on this?
Yeah, thank you, Eva. Maybe let me start with the first one, which was on equity. And I guess you're probably talking about, let's say, equity. For example, is there access to work-based learning programs for young women or women equally than we see for young men and men? And it is actually not that easy to get data. We are currently working on that to get a little bit data. My colleague Christine, who is with us, she can confirm that it's not that easy. We have a little bit of data from the labor force survey from 2016, where we can see that we see less female learners in work-based learning program, especially in apprenticeship. That's data for the European Union, plus some 4 or 5 additional countries. It's even harder to get data from our partner countries, but the data we have also shows that we have a problem with equity. We still do not know what are exactly the reasons. We try to find that out in, let's say, the coming months, because we will have a webinar in September, especially on this specific topic on work-based learning and women. So that would take place, I think, September 22, if I'm not mistaken. And we could send that to you. But yes, I have to confirm it is an issue, equity. We see, of course, also other problems with disadvantaged groups, like for example, learners with a weak economic or socio-economical background, who cannot afford, for example, the transport between school and company or home and company. We see that this is a problem in rural areas. And there again, this needs to be monitored. And then, because without any data, you will not be able to take appropriate measures. So monitoring is always, let's say, the start. And then, of course, you can work with incentives. Incentives are not only there for companies, they could also be, of course, implemented for the learners, for example, to subsidize transport, to subsidize accommodation. We see good examples in some countries where we have facilities where the learners can stay.
איזה מולטיאני.
Yeah.
גם בתוך זום, גם בתוך...
So then yeah, Eva, sorry.
No, I would like to ask our participants to switch off the microphone so that we can hear each other better.
אפשר?
The second question is about, let's say, the benefits of companies, be it productivity, productive work. And I mentioned this instrument that is there, which we call the cost-benefit analysis. And there are a couple of countries that do cost-benefit analysis on a regular basis, like every 4 or 5 years. Switzerland is an example. Germany is an example. This is, let's say, quite challenging. But what you can do is you can also simulate those cost-benefit analysis. And we have, for example, we have the case of Spain where that has been done. That's less expensive. It requires less resources. And you can, of course, also do, if you want to start, if you're not sure, if you want to introduce, for example, incentives for companies and you're not sure about the costs and benefits they have, you can also start with some qualitative research. We did that, for example, in North Macedonia. I'm not sure if there's anyone here from North Macedonia, but I don't think so. So you can start with, let's say, a small group of companies, maybe 15, 20 companies, a good distribution, a balanced, let's say, participation, and then do some focus group discussions with them to try to figure out how they view the costs, their costs for material, the trainer, and then also their benefits. And benefits can be quantified. Of course, that depends on the duration of work-based learning. If the program is longer, let's say when you have a 3-year program with a substantial component of work-based learning, then, of course, learners get productive at an earlier stage and then also contribute in terms of, you can quantify that in terms of money. If you want to see such a, let's say, a questionnaire that you could use in such focus group discussions, please contact me. I can help you. Of course, I can also send you, let's say, the more sophisticated cost-benefit analysis that has been done over the past years in some of the European Union member states.
Thank you, Stefan. So it's clear how evidence actually and monitoring is key, especially in this specific area. So I would move to Annette with my second question. I will try to kind of merge a few questions together, and the question actually relates to the preparation of the company and in-company trainers in particular. So we had several questions related to this specific, let's say, part of the work-based learning. And the questions are the in-company trainers, are they required to have a specific particular status? And what is also needed to help them to be prepared, for example, to react to specific individual needs of learners? Yes. So can you share with us some good examples?
Yes. Sure. I think that's a question. I have to say that depends very much on the systems in place. So in, let's say, countries with very mature apprenticeship systems, the role of the in-company trainer is actually regulated or part of the training regulation. So it is very defined what they have to do. They have to follow a certain training to become an in-company teacher and trainer. There are preconditions. So you need to have a certain amount of professional expertise, but you also have to have a certain amount of pedagogical expertise. So there are countries, obviously Germany, Austria, and Denmark, so those countries that really are very mature with apprenticeship schemes, where this is all very regulated and very clear. But there are obviously other countries where this is less the case. So countries where apprenticeship schemes are much smaller. And then I think what we were trying to do with these Echovet building blocks is to try and just give a couple of pointers that are important to focus on and to make sure that we really focus on the learner's needs as opposed to the company's needs, because in many sectors, for instance, in the hospitality sector, where there is a lot of seasonal work, for instance, it can be very easy to sort of lose sight a little bit of the fact that we're training a learner for a qualification, and that means that they have to cover certain learning outcomes. And when I don't know, there is a lot of work, and then obviously the learner is sort of, let's say, the processes in the company, and they help and they learn a lot doing so, but it may not be always in line with the learning outcomes that are possibly prescribed by the training regulations, that is, for instance, an aspect that we kind of have to bear in mind, and we have to bear in mind the collaboration with the vet schools. We have to bear in mind that learners also need feedback in a certain way. So this is all really what is what this building block number 3 here aims to do. But in terms of the of your question, so what are the preconditions to become an in-company trainer and mentor? There are many countries and many apprenticeship schemes where this is very informal, but nevertheless, you should really consider a couple of let's say aspects to make sure this is of benefit to the learner, but also to the company.
Thank you, Annette.
Nadezhda or Eva, may I briefly add to this?
Yes, quickly.
Yeah. So I fully agree, Annette, that this is the case. What might be a good idea, and we see a good example, we have a good example from Latvia, is, or actually it's the Baltic countries. They have a training program where they train in-company trainers together with coordinators in the schools. And this is especially useful when you start work-based learning programs, because in those systems that come from a more school-based tradition, it's usually, the beginning is very difficult. I mean, there are lots of hurdles. These are two very different worlds, the world of work and the world of education. And to train them together can be very, very useful. We have seen excellent results there. If you need more information about these training programs that they have implemented in the Baltic countries, in Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, please contact me.
Thank you. So it's clear that the cooperation between actually the company and the schools is crucial. And I would stop actually our question and answer session here so that we can continue with our program. Thank you, Annette, and thank you, Stefan. And I would like to also add that we will actually continue with our discussion on ETF Open Space. So if your questions haven't been answered, we will continue in another platform. Don't worry.
Sorry, okay, but I have to leave because I have a double booking. I need to hop on to another meeting.
Thank you very much, Annette, for being here with us. Thank you.
But I'm very happy. If there are any further questions, Nadezhda and Eva, please share my email, and I'm very happy to get in touch with anybody.
Absolutely, we will do that, because I think there are more questions that have been we could not address in this short slot. So
yeah, super.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good meeting.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, Annette. Thanks, dear colleagues, for your questions. Now I am happy to welcome our next speaker, Khaber Eradze, the Deputy Director of the National Center for Educational Quality Enhancement of Georgia. And Khaber is also responsible for quality assurance in both general and vocational education. And he has also been an active contributor to the national education reforms and strategies in Georgia. Besides that, Khaber is also the contact person for Georgia in the ETF Forum for Quality Assurance in Vocational Education and Training. So I'm passing the floor to you, Khaber.
So thank you, Nadezhda. Yes, it's my pleasure and my honor to present the Georgian case of quality assurance of work-based learning. to our colleagues. At the beginning, I just want to mention that, like in other countries, this pandemic situation had a very dramatic impact on vocational education, as well as on all fields of education in general. But we had a very, very special case because our system of quality assurance of vocational education and training was changed from 2020. So this was exactly the time when pandemic attack was really taken to our country. So two challenges, like novelty of the quality assurance system, and second, the pandemic situation really was to be taken into account. So actually, business had big problems of business operations besides the participating in the work-based learning. So our approach is what will be presented now in my presentation is slightly the new and quite different from the quality assurance approaches we had before. And we are just in the situation of observing these new regulations and new approaches. But I'm happy to hear from our previous presenters that our approach to the quality assurance of vocational education and training, as well as the work-based learning, is mostly in compliance with Echovet and other best case requirements. So it's really nice to hear and listen. Now, I will share my presentation. I hope you can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, great.
Okay. Yes, if you extend to full screen, great, thank you.
Okay, good. So starting with facts about Georgian vocational education, first is that our national qualifications framework is fully in compliance now with the European qualification framework. And this was one of the big reforms in our system of education. Now, forms of vocational education and training is that providing big qualification programs, like we used to say, initial VET programs, professional training and retraining. And retraining is more or less the continuous VET, but professional training, which is something like initial training, but short term, and we wanted to impose this kind of opportunity in the formal education system in order to enable the society members to get the employment skills faster than in bigger qualification programs. So actually it works very well. And the recognition of non-formal education also is very important in our country, since we are the post-Soviet country, and the failure of the vocational education system caused the labor market. And now more than 80% of our labor force estimately have not formal qualifications. So recognition of non-formal education is very important for the coming years in our country. So number of VET providers is 91, and number of national curricula in which we provide qualifications is 101. Number of programs provided in countrywide is 800. So these are relatively small figures, but the country is also relatively small. We have a population up to 3.5 million altogether. So retraining providers number is 60, and these are the mostly private companies that want to provide certificates which are recognized as a formal education by our system of education. Number of training and retraining programs is 400, and now you can see this is a very, let's say, heavy heritage we get from Soviet system of vocational education, percentage of school graduates, which is up to 40,000 in our country, more or less, 64% just goes to the graduates follow a higher education. I'm sorry for missing the numbers here. 64 is the percentage of school graduates that go to the higher education, and only 8% go to the vocational education. But we can see the increasing number of the higher education qualification holders that then return to the vocational education. And now percentage of vocational students is 7% that already have the diplomas in a higher education. So, and this number increases year by year. Now, how does the quality assurance system in vocational education works? And we have authorization. This is something similar in other countries, maybe called licensing, that institution becomes the, acquires the status of educational institution. And this status is awarded for 6 years, and these are the standards which are checked and effective from 2020. And they are in compliance with Echovet principles. We are proud to say that. So what we check is mission and strategy, curricula, student services, human resources, and material information and financial resources in order to the school gets a status of vocational school. Now, regarding the professional training and retraining, which are more short-term courses, also part of the formal education, duration of authorization is 3 years, and we check curricula, resources, and administration. And as I mentioned, mainly representatives of private companies or private sector take this second, let's say, opportunity to provide education. Now, this is a little bit slightly different approach from the definitions provided by Stefan Thomas in his presentation. In our case, our law says that the vocational education and vocational training can be carried out only in the work-based learning form. But how can it be done? That's the question. So work-based learning can be done in the real work environment and in the simulated environment. So mostly this way is more school-based, but this is not only a theoretical part in the school, but workshops are the mandatory in order to get authorization to become a VET training school. Therefore, it is also considered, according to our national definition of work-based learning, that if the training is taken in the simulated environment, this is also considered as a work-based learning. Now, about the real work environment, we have two types of training provision. One is called the dual learning. And in dual learning, a vocational colleges together with the training companies take a part. And there are the requirements towards the dual learning curricula, the delivery. More than 50% have to be done in the enterprises. More than 50% of learning outcomes have to be achieved in the enterprises. No less than 12 months should be duration of the program, and the training company status has to be acquired by the company. Second way is the cooperative learning, which is not the dual learning, and between 30 and 50% of the less than 50% of the learning outcomes are achieved in the enterprise. And in this case, the requirements are slightly different. We don't require the working contract between the student and the company, and other requirements I will state later in my slides. But if the learning outcomes are between 30 and 50%, of course, the company has to have the status of the training company. So we are more strict in this case. Now let's go to the system view in general. Learning in the real work environment, as I mentioned, there are two main players like VET college and the training company. So WET College and the training company conclude the contract among themselves on the institutional level, how they cooperate when they provide the work-based learning. WET colleges get the authorization from ECHE, the organization I represent now, but training company gets the authorization from the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So in order to company to get the training company status, which is the status actually they have to address the Chamber of Commerce and Industry or skills, sectorial skills organizations which operate under the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So on the system level, of course, our organization, National Center for Education Quality Enhancement and the Chamber of Commerce and Industry have the memorandum among ourselves. So there are two types of mutual cooperation on the institutional level, college and the particular company, and the system level, like National Center and the Chamber of Commerce, who are responsible on the college side and the company side training providing. Now, what are the requirements to obtain the right for the training company? Like general criteria are set by the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, but of course, the sectorial skills organizations can set additional requirements based on the sectorial specifications. So what are the general requirements is that company has to be officially registered in the National Register of Business Register. They have to show the financial sustainability, safety requirements, fulfillment in the working environment. They have to have the instructor, but interesting in our case is that company instructor, according to the law on vocational education and training, are considered as one of the types of vocational teachers. So these requirements are defined also by the law, and the real working processes have to be going on in the company. So company has to be active actually, and the processes which are adequate to the learning outcome should be achieved in the company should be going on, it should be essential for the company processes. So maximum number of students also is determined because we, in advance, the company should know how many students can really get the work-based learning training in the company. So actually how the company and the college, vocational college cooperate, the cooperation is facilitated by sectorial skills organizations, and the process is also monitored by sectorial skills organization. Contract is signed between the vocational school and the training company, which states at least the following: name of the program, location of the educational enterprise, like a training company, distribution of learning outcomes between the school and the company. Distribution of learning outcomes sounds a little bit strange because both parts are responsible for the program learning outcomes, but they just at the beginning take the responsibility on the particular learning outcomes, which can be theoretical or practical. So student quota, number of teachers or instructors, description of assessments system will be used under the program. Information on vocational students funding and provided financial aid and other incentive measures. Information on vocational students remuneration, because as I mentioned in the dual education, it is obligatory that company pays the salary to the student. Actually, this is case of employment. So terms of learning and working in the educational enterprise and obligations of educational enterprise, labor safety, and creating the safe work environment. So now about the program planning. Of course, program is developed and implemented jointly by the school and the company, but it is based on the national curricula, and national curricula which is approved by ECHE together with the sectorial organizations is a list of learning outcomes should be achieved under the particular curricula. So this is a national curricula, but it provides some space for the school and the institution, the company, to redesign or add some learning outcomes, but mainly qualification is the qualification, and under the certain qualification, a certain minimum, let's say, learning outcomes are meant. So they have to synchronize the theory and practice in time. Let's say the college cannot provide the theoretical part about something else, and the practical assignment should not take another. They have to synchronize these activities. Transportation time should take not more than 3 hours between college and the learning and an enterprise. These are the requirements by the law. Ratio of student and instructor in the company should be 1 to 3. So at least 1 instructor for every 3 students. But exemptions can be defined also by sectorial skills organizations. Requirements toward instructors are defined by the law, as I mentioned, and amendments in the program or replacement of the teacher or instructor should be reported to the National Center and SSO within 30 days after these actions have been taken in order to assure the quality and compliance with the requirements toward the teacher. So actually, student has 2 types of contracts. Of course, in some cases, in some countries, we know that there is a 3-side contract practice, but in our case, student signs contract with the college and student signs contract with the company. And the college and the company actually coordinate their activities based on the institutional level contract. So students' contract with the company also has some requirements, should be stated, like name of the program, location where student has to be working, information about the students' funding and financial aid and terms of learning and working in the company, obligations of the company that they provide a safety environment and occupational safety and other obligations of the company to use students' work for doing that work which is not related, which is related to teaching only and achieving learning outcomes, information about remuneration and other information. Actually, unfortunately, but we are working on that this contract is considered as the employment, as a regular employment, and the national law, labor law requirements are applied to these relations between student and the teaching company. We would like to impose another definition as a apprenticeship, define it differently, and maybe this remuneration should not be charged with the income tax or provide any other types of benefits. But currently, this is just employment, regular employment. Therefore, we are working on these changes.
Kahaber, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Would you manage to conclude in 1 minute? Because we are running. Would you manage to conclude in 1 minute?
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
Sure. Now, of course, SSOs have the supervisory functions, and since this presentation will be shared with participants, then I will skip this slide and you can just, just go through. And if you have additional questions, I will be more than happy to get your questions on my email, which is at the end of the last slide. Now, study process is also monitored together by the school and the company, and students usually keep their journal records, and a supervisor from the company also signs, periodically revises this journal and signs, puts the signature on it. And in case of bankruptcy or the training company loses the status of the training company, then a school is has the obligation to place student in another company or provide any additional services to continue studies. So we have midterm evaluation, which is necessary in the first half of after the first half of the program delivery. Qualifications are granted by the independent the board for qualification exams are taken. Rules for qualification exams are defined by the Chamber of Commerce, but actually qualifications exams are supervised by SSOs, as we mentioned, and this is mandatory to take qualification exams. So prior to establishment of SSOs, as I mentioned, these regulations are slightly new for our country, so we don't have SSOs in all fields. So prior to establishment of SSOs in all fields, their functions are performed by the Chamber of Commerce and Industry themselves. And for cooperation purposes between the Chamber and the Ministry of Education and our side, we just established a new agency, which is called Skills Agency, Georgian Skills Agency, which will be operational for September this year. So this means that the responsibility for vocational education and training is not anymore taken by the Ministry of Education and Science, and a business, Chamber of Commerce and Industry, as the establisher of this organization, takes its own responsibility and feels more ownership on the training provision. So this is generally what I wanted to share with you. And yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks, Kehaber, for opening up the Georgian experience to all of us. Very interesting to see say the reciprocal responsibilities of enterprises and colleges towards the quality of work-based learning. Also, the supporting role of the Chamber of Commerce and the sectoral skills organizations. I'm reminding the participants to use the chat for questions. And now I would like to invite our next speaker, Brigitte Bouquet, international expert on qualifications from France Compétences. So I'm passing the floor to you, Brigitte.
Hello, hello everybody. So I will, I'm here, I'm replacing Elena Altukova, who is the lady who works with Echovet, and but she's for the time being, let's say, free for some months. I will try to explain to you the quality in apprenticeship, but let's say more on the point of view of the system than on the details of the apprenticeship by itself. So in France, next slide, please. What is apprenticeship in France? It's a way to learn in training centers and firms. We also allow apprenticeship in public services, and it is open to any kind of qualifications and diplomas which are registered in our qualification framework. So you see, it's there is almost 500,000 contracts, so people, young people who are in this learning path, which is really promoted by the state, and it's really well accepted by firms, because otherwise we couldn't have this amount of contracts, even during the pandemic period. So it's considered as initial vet for people from 16 till almost 30 years old. We have many centers which we call in French CFA, Centre de Formation des Apprentis, which are really, for the time being and during this period, training apprentices. May I have please the other slide? Next slide, please. This training path was really renewed by a law 2 years ago on the freedom to, which was called the freedom to choose one's professional future, and which still has the objective to encourage the transmission of competencies and integration of people directly in working life, to enable firms to use more frequently this system to engage young people. And the changes which were brought by the law is that the management of the system, which was formerly under the responsibility of the regions, now is on the responsibility of firms, of sectors and of firms. There was really a big shift on the management and also financing of apprenticeship. And this maybe has to see with quality assurance. Next slide, please. So this system, this training system, has as objective to prepare for a qualification which is registered in the national databases of qualification with the level of our qualification framework. This is really the first step for quality assurance because we really in France want people with who make the apprenticeship to have a qualification with linked with the requirements of the labor market at the end of their training course. This is for all, I said already, types of qualifications, VET, technological diplomas of the Ministry of Education, but we also have higher education. Just some figures in France, the contracts of apprenticeship for, let's say, EQF level 3, which is our entrance level in the labor market, we have 26%. Level 4, which is baccalaureate, is 16%. And then we go, 22% is level 5, which is corresponding to short cycles in higher education or in higher vet. And we have 22%, which is for above level 5, which is level 6, 7 and 8, as we can also have a PhD through apprenticeship, even if it is scarce. So you see, we have really all the levels which are represented, and we have many diplomas in the engineers, business schools, and higher education diplomas, master degrees, which are got by this kind of training course. So apprenticeship is based on sandwich training courses in what we call CFA, so training centers for apprentices, and it's based on work on firm and theoretical training in the CFA. But even next slide, please. When we speak of quality assurance, so the first part is you have the necessity to have a qualification, to prepare a qualification which is registered and as a national level. You have also a system of accreditation of the centers. They can be run by private chambers of commerce and industry, further education organizations, so universities. That's not the point, but they have to be accredited. One of the major improvements brought by the law in 2008 was 2018, sorry, was that now companies have also been allowed to establish CFAs. So there is not so big a difference with, let's say, the dual systems of Germany, Austria, and so on, because firms can also run CFAs, which was not possible before the law. And for improving the quality of the system, we have now a system which is called cost per qualification rule, which is called the contract cost, which means that all the organizations have to analyze with France Compétences, which is my organization, the cost of their contract for their apprentice. And they have to compare, they have to work with the sectors in order to have a market, let's say, a market which is quite rationalized. And if there are differences, it must be explained, and the difference in the prices of the contracts may be proved by them and let's say accepted. So this kind of clarification of the costs is, for us French people, considered as really a quality assurance of the system, because it becomes more transparent. We also have quality assurance, next slide please, of the training centers. We have now for the centers a new organization which was set by the law, and we have the fact that training organization must be compliant with requirements on quality of vet qualification of vet and these requirements are set by texts. It's for all the training institutions which get public funding or mutual funds given by firms. So this obligation to be compliant with vet quality assurance is also extended to higher education as long as they have CFA. And it's, let's say, we put some criteria which are described in the quality label, which is called Calliope. And these criteria can be also detailed depending on the training organizations. So this label, Calliope, will be compulsory for all the training institutions, CFA for apprenticeship, vet or training centers for other kind of continuing education, even for initial vet, and these providers will have to be certified by an external organization. And CFA will, as the other training centers, will have the obligation to be certified by what in France is COFRAC, which is a French accreditation committee, so external accreditation. As you see, it's a member of a broader organization. Next slide, please. So my institution, France Compétences, is also entitled to select after a kind of tender to select organizations and to recognize them for, let's say, have the same role than the COFRAC. But it will be the same indicators and exactly the same thing which will be done. But for instance, we have selected some institutions like France Éducation Internationale, which is in charge of French as a foreign language, and they fulfill all the requirements. So they will be allowed to do the same thing as the COFRAC for the training centers which are in the same area. So we have these 7 quality criteria which are common, which are broken down into 32 indicators, and 4 of them are special for centers for apprenticeship. We have 1 on citizenship. We have 2, well, the first is citizenship. The second is that there must be something which will be proved so that the rights and the dedication of apprenticeship are taken into account. This includes security rules. We have a third special indicator, requirements on the staff. There must be somebody in the staff who is in charge of the question of disability, because we want to avoid any kind of discrimination. And we also have, must have in the staff somebody who will be in charge of international mobility, because we want apprenticeship to be international. We have our neighbors, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany, and we have let's say, relations with these countries. So international aspect is interesting. We also have Spain. And we have, and this is also an important element of quality assurance. We must have somebody in charge of what we call, well, no, in French is comité de suivi, but that's not the point. It's a committee which is in charge of the follow-up of the evolution of the qualification, and which will take into account every element which will be useful to make the qualification be closer to the labor market and be improved in terms of quality assurance. And the 4th special element, indicator, is the insertion in the labor market. This means that there must be somebody in the staff and also a process which is devoted to the follow-up of the integration of the apprentices in the labor market. This is also part of the quality assurance, because this is really the indicator of the value of the qualification and also the value of the training course. May I please have the next slide? So you see, I detailed for you the criteria, all the criteria which are common to all the training institutions. So and also compulsory for CFAs, because maybe we can go quick because there are 2 slides on these criteria. We call console maybe. So you see, these are the common quality assurance criterion, which are, and some of indicators are, as I told you, dedicated to CFAs. Maybe next slide. We also have another aspect of quality assurance for apprenticeship. It's the quality of training. Apprenticeship supervisor, mentors, or well, whatever you want, are compulsory. Otherwise, there is no contract of apprenticeship with the firm. This is within the firm. In the firm, this supervisor must, this is set by text, support and train apprentices during their working time. So it's really learning by working. They must make themselves available to answer the questions, not only you do this and you come to me afterwards, and monitor their progress within the center. And they must be able to make an evaluation of the competencies and to cooperate with the training center. So there is really a dialogue between the supervisor in the firm and the training center, because there is a follow-up of each learner, of course, and they really make the link between the two training places. They have really an important role within the firm to really make transparency and trust on what is learned by the apprentice in the firm where it works. Next slide, please. And this is maybe an answer for a question which was asked before to Annette. This is the case in France. The competencies of these supervisors in firms. It's left to the sectors, to the sectors. There must be an agreement of the sectors between employers and employees in order to list the competencies of the supervisor, depending on, let's say, the particularities of each sector. The firm must take into account the agreement of the sector, of each sector. That they cannot choose if they are in metallurgy, the agreement of agriculture to be. So it's really compulsory. If there is no agreement, which is agreed by the employers and employees of the sectors, the conditions are fixed by text, and they are the following, you see. The supervisor must have a qualification, whatever the nature of the qualification. It can be a diploma of let's say, a formal system, or it can be a professional title, which is registered in our qualification framework. And it must be, of course, of the same field. And this qualification must be at least of the same level than the one of the apprentice. And 1 year of professional activity directly connected with the qualification which is prepared. If there is, next slide please, if there is no...
Brigitte, may I please interrupt you? Could you try to conclude in 1 minute?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, of course. I am at the end of my, so if there is no diploma, let's say the diploma must be replaced by years of practice in the same field. So the quality of training, so you can read, we have set rules for the contract, for the training courses, and then we must the apprentice must give an appreciation, which is the base of quality assurance, which will not be, of course, taken into account for its examination. So I think I'm at the end of my word, and I thank you for your attention.
Great, thank you very much, Brigitte, for presenting the quality assurance of apprenticeship. And it's I think very interesting to see how the quality aspect is really embedded in it, and from the certification of the training centers by an accredited body to specific quality criteria and the national standard, and also the level of competencies of apprenticeship supervisors. So now we have reached the final part of our webinar, and we definitely running late. So we are supposed to have a questions and answers session now, but because we practically ran out of time, we will transfer this questions and answers session online to our ETF knowledge sharing and discussion platform, Open Space. So don't worry, all your questions will be copied there, and we will ask our speakers to answer. So we will reach out to you, Echovet, and you, Brigitte, and we'll ask you to answer these questions. I'm just asking our audience, in case you are already a member of the ETF Open Space, you can register, and we will share the link to the page of the webinar with you. So we can continue this discussion online. And now I would just like, before closing, I will pass the floor to Stefan. Stefan, if you would like to highlight in really 1 minute, 60 seconds, some key messages from today.
1 minute or 60 seconds?
60 seconds.
60 seconds. Okay. First of all, I would like to say thank you to our 3 colleagues from France, from Georgia, and also from Brussels for presenting their cases. I think these were very interesting cases. We have seen, if I start with the last case, France, where we have in the past 2-3 years, where we have seen some major reforms in the country going on, and how this is also affecting quality assurance. Quite an interesting case, I think. Still, it is a well-established system with a long tradition, while the system in Georgia is much younger. Still, enormous progress has been made in the past years. I had let's say, the pleasure to also follow that at a certain point in time. And that is also an interesting aspect, how such a young system is then, let's say, complemented with the appropriate quality assurance measures. I would also like to thank, of course, all our participants. Please take this opportunity to, let's say, to ask your questions in our open space or on our open space platform. That's exactly why this platform is there. I would like to thank you for the interesting discussions, for the interesting questions. I hope that we will see each other again. As I said, please watch out. We will have very soon, we will have a new handbook exactly on this topic, which is going a little bit more into the details. It might also be interesting even for the member states. So also, Brigitte, might also be for you, and of course also for our colleague Annette in Brussels. So thanks very much once again to all of you, Nadia, of course, and Simone, who made this, and Eva, who made this possible. I guess still, Nadia, that you will have the final words, thanks. Right?
Yes, thanks, Stefan. I would just like to remind that after the webinar, we will, as usual, send you the feedback form where we will ask for your feedback on today's webinar. It always helps us to improve. So I'm joining Stefan in thanking all the speakers and participants, and see you in our next webinar. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for the interesting webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.